Close your eyes and picture a quiet summer evening in the American Midwest. The year is 1906, and a young boy lies in a field of tall grass just outside the tiny town of Marceline, Missouri. The sun is low in the sky, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. Insects hum drowsily in the warm air, and the scent of clover rises gently from the earth. This boy is Walter Elias Disney, and he is watching clouds drift slowly overhead, their shapes shifting into animals and faces in his imagination. The landscape around him is simple and serene: rolling hills, a patchwork of cornfields, and a distant line of willow trees swaying by the creek. No camera has yet captured his daydreams, but in this peaceful moment, the seeds of an artist's soul are being quietly planted. Walt's family moved to Marceline when he was just 4 years old, and to him this place would always feel like a living painting. His father Elias was a hard-working man who built a modest white farmhouse with a wide porch and a big red barn nearby. Mother Flora kept the house warm with the smell of baking bread and the soft rustle of her long skirts. The daily rhythm was gentle: the crow of a rooster at dawn, the slow creak of the windmill, the sound of horses' hooves on the dirt road leading to town. Walt would often wander alone through the orchards and pastures, collecting pebbles, sketching on scraps of paper, or simply sitting by the railroad tracks to watch the great locomotives pass. The trains were a special fascination. Their distant whistles promised other worlds and far-off adventures, and they would later appear again and again in his motion pictures. On this farm, Walt formed his first deep friendships, not only with people but with animals. An old sway-backed horse named Rupert stood patiently in the meadow, swishing his tail at flies, and Walt would clamber onto his back and imagine they were knights riding through an enchanted forest. There was a family of ducks that waddled down to the pond each morning, and a nervous pig that squealed happily when Walt scratched behind its ears. Years later, when people asked him why he drew animals with such life and personality, Walt would remember these gentle creatures from his childhood. They were not just animals to him, they were companions in a world that felt safe and full of possibility. Even the trees seemed friendly, especially the great cottonwood that stood near the barn, a dreamer's tree whose leaves rustled like whispered secrets whenever the wind blew. The town of Marceline itself was small enough that a boy could know every face. Main Street ran just a few short blocks, lined with brick storefronts, a barber shop, a candy store, and a tiny movie theater that had not yet learned to speak. It was here that Walt first saw a moving picture, a silent film flickering in the dark while a piano played softly. The magic of light and shadow dancing on a sheet left him spellbound. Afterward, he would often sit on the wooden sidewalks with his chin in his hands, observing the townspeople as they went about their errands. The druggist with his spectacles, the ladies with their parasols, the old men playing checkers outside the general store, all of them were characters in a quiet story that Walt was beginning to understand. He learned that even ordinary life, when watched carefully, was full of little wonders. Walt's urge to draw grew stronger with every passing season. His Aunt Margaret, who lived nearby, encouraged him by giving him rolls of paper and sticks of charcoal. He would sit on the porch steps, sketching the same scenes over and over: the barn, the cottonwood, the family dog sleeping in a patch of sunlight. Sometimes his father frowned upon such idle pastimes, believing that hard labor was the only proper use of a boy's time. But Walt found ways to steal quiet moments. The dim light of the kerosene lamp in the evening became his studio, and the kitchen table his drawing board. He once even covered the side of the whitewashed barn with tar drawings of horses and houses, an act of artistic rebellion that earned him a scolding, but also a secret pride. The images were crude, but they were his, and they made the world a little more his own. When Walt was 9, the family moved to Kansas City, leaving the farm behind. The transition was difficult for a boy who had grown up surrounded by open fields and the gentle voices of nature. The city was louder, smokier, and full of strangers. Yet Walt carried Marceline inside him like a precious locket. In the years to come, whenever life became too noisy or uncertain, he would close his eyes and remember the cottonwood tree, the warm flanks of the old horse, and the golden light on the Missouri hills. He would carry these memories into his work, turning them into a place called Main Street, USA, a place that would one day welcome millions of visitors into the same feeling of safety and wonder he had known as a boy. For now, though, he was just a quiet, lanky child watching streetcars clatter past, holding a pencil and dreaming of a bigger world. As the sun sets on this chapter of Walt's life, imagine him standing at the back of a departing train, his small face pressed to the window, watching the fields of his childhood dissolve into twilight. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels is soothing, almost like a lullaby. He does not yet know that the songs of birds and the chug of locomotives will one day become symphonies in his films, that the simple joy of drawing a mouse will change entertainment forever. For now, there is only the softness of evening, the smell of coal smoke, and the quiet hum of a boy dreaming. The journey ahead is long, but tonight, under a canopy of stars, the whole world feels like a promise waiting to be kept. The city of Kansas City in the early 1910s was a place of steam and ambition. Its streets were lined with tall brick buildings whose windows gleamed in the morning light. For young Walt Disney, however, the city meant work. Every day before sunrise, he rose from his narrow bed while his family still slept. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock in the hallway. He pulled on worn shoes and stepped out into the cool, dark morning to deliver newspapers. The streets were empty, lit only by the pale glow of gas lamps. As he walked his route, the smell of fresh ink and damp sidewalks filled the air. He moved quietly from porch to porch, leaving the folded papers just so, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. This was not the adventurous life he had imagined, but it taught him discipline, and it gave him hours to think, to watch the dawn break, and to observe the waking city with a budding artist's eye. Despite the long hours, Walt found time to dream. He attended Saturday classes at the Kansas City Art Institute, sitting among easels and the soft scratching of charcoal. The studio was a high-ceilinged room with tall windows that let in the pale northern light. There, a patient instructor taught him the basics of perspective and shading, but Walt was more interested in capturing motion. He drew comic strips in his spare time, filling notebooks with characters who ran, jumped, and tumbled across the pages. He and a school friend once even performed short sketches at local theaters, simple vaudeville acts that made audiences chuckle. These brief glimpses of applause taught him something essential, that bringing joy to others was a kind of magic. At home, he set up a makeshift animation stand in the family garage, using a camera he borrowed and a book about animation from the public library. Late into the night, the little garage glowed with a single bulb as Walt moved paper cutouts one frame at a time, enchanted by the illusion of life. After a brief stint as an ambulance driver in the final months of the First World War, Walt returned to Kansas City with a new sense of purpose. He was still a teenager, but his hands already knew the weight of a pencil better than any other tool. He found work at a commercial art studio, where desks stood in neat rows and the air smelled of ink and rubber cement. It was there he met a shy, gifted artist named Byworks. The two young men formed an immediate friendship, united by a shared love of drawing and a quiet determination to do something new. They would spend their lunch hours sketching caricatures and imagining a future where drawings could truly move. The studio's large windows overlooked a bustling street, and the afternoon sun would often slant across their drawing boards, illuminating the tiny figures taking shape under their hands. In those peaceful afternoons, the first sparks of a creative partnership were lit, one that would soon change the world. Walt's ambitions soon outgrew the Kansas City office. He decided to start his own company, which he called Laugh-O-Gram Films, setting up in a small, dusty studio above a restaurant. The building was old but charming, with creaky wooden floors and a big window that faced a quiet alley. From the street below, you could sometimes smell the aroma of bread baking, mixing with the scent of art supplies. Walt and a handful of young animators worked through the night, fueled by canned beans and grand ideas. They produced short fairy tale cartoons, modernized and whimsical, that showed genuine promise. Yet the business of animation was fickle, and despite their efforts, the money ran out. One morning, Walt found himself with a bankrupt company and hardly a coin in his pocket. The dream had stumbled, but it had not died. He packed a single cardboard suitcase, said goodbye to his friends, and bought a train ticket to California. The Missouri landscape rolled away once more, this time with a young man's resolve as his only treasure. Walt arrived in Los Angeles in the summer of 1923. The city was a sprawling garden of orange groves and dusty roads, with soft sunshine pouring down from a pale blue sky. He stepped off the train carrying little more than his suit and his pencil set. His first weeks were spent sleeping in a spare room at his Uncle Robert's house, a modest bungalow shaded by palm trees. The mornings were peaceful there. He would sit on the porch watching the hummingbirds dart among the flowers, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. In his mind, though, he was already building a new world. He convinced his brother Roy, who was recovering from tuberculosis in a veterans hospital, to join him. Together, in a small one-story office behind a real estate company, they founded the Disney Brothers Studio. The space was humble, a few drawing desks, a second-hand camera, and a window that looked out onto a quiet suburban street lined with pepper trees. But to Walt, it felt like a palace of possibility. In that tiny studio, Walt and Roy began producing a new series of short films combining live action and animation, called the Alice Comedies. Every morning, the brothers would arrive early, just as the sun was burning off the coastal haze. Roy handled the business and kept the books meticulously, while Walt oversaw the creative work, directing, drawing, and encouraging the small staff. The atmosphere was one of quiet industriousness. The soft sound of pencils sketching on paper, the gentle hum of a fan in the corner, the occasional murmur of a story idea being discussed over coffee. Walt's young mind was already churning with visions of what animation could become, not just a novelty, but a true art form that could stir the heart. He would often stay late into the evening, the studio's single window glowing yellow in the darkness. Outside, the scent of night-blooming jasmine drifted on the breeze, and the distant mountains stood purple against the stars. In those solitary hours, with Los Angeles asleep around him, Walt slowly transformed from a failed businessman into a quiet, unstoppable force of imagination. As the studio's reputation grew, a new home was found on Hyperion Avenue, a stretch of land that would become the birthplace of a golden age. The new building was larger, with a stucco exterior and a red tile roof, typical of California's Spanish-style architecture. A courtyard with a fountain provided a peaceful spot for employees to rest. In the mornings, before the heat settled in, the light fell softly through the windows and illuminated motes of dust floating above the drawing tables. Walt's own office was simple, furnished with just a desk, a few chairs, and a bulletin board pinned with sketches. He filled the space not with paperwork, but with life, model trains, miniatures, and little toys that made him smile. It was here, surrounded by his growing family of artists, that he began to dream of a cartoon so charming, so full of life, that the whole world would fall in love. That dream would soon wear the shape of a mouse, an idea born not in a flash of lightning, but in the gentle hum of a train headed home. The story of how Mickey Mouse came into the world is a quiet legend, one that feels like a fireside tale passed between friends. In the spring of 1928, Walt Disney found himself on a train rattling east from New York to Los Angeles. He had just lost the rights to his first successful character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, to a film distributor. The betrayal stung, but the motion of the train soothed him. Outside the window, the American heartland unrolled like a tapestry, endless fields of wheat, sleepy towns with water towers, rivers gleaming in the late afternoon light. Walt sat in his seat, a blank notepad on his lap, and let his pencil wander. There is no photograph of this moment, but we can imagine it clearly. The soft clatter of the tracks, the dusty golden light slanting through the window, and a young artist weary but undefeated, drawing small circles and curves until a cheerful, figured mouse appeared on the page. He named him Mortimer, but his wife Lillian gently suggested something warmer, Mickey. And so Mickey Mouse was born, as soft as a sigh, as quiet as an idea that refuses to fade. When Walt returned to the studio on Hyperion Avenue, The news of Oswald's loss had already spread. But he did not gather his team for angry speeches. Instead, he described the little mouse he had sketched and asked his friend of Iwerks to refine the design. Iwerks sat at his drawing board, a quiet man of few words and swift hands, and over several days he shaped Mickey into a character of simple elegance: circular ears, a plump little body, a long thin tail, and outsized shoes that seemed to dance on their own. The mood in the studio during those weeks was subdued but expectant, like the hush before a sunrise. There were no guarantees, only the hope that this new creation would charm audiences. The artists worked under the soft hum of electric lamps, their pencils scratching against paper long after the sun had set. Outside, the scent of California sagebrush floated in through open windows, mixing with the tang of ink. It was a time of patient labor, of nurturing a fragile dream into existence. That dream took a great leap forward with the decision to make Mickey talk, or rather, to make his world sing. Sound films were still a novelty in Hollywood, a technology many studios viewed with suspicion. Walt saw it not as a gimmick, but as a way to breathe deeper life into animation. The result was Steamboat Willie, a black-and-white short that featured Mickey as a Johnny Deckhand whistling a tune, tapping his feet, and causing gentle mayhem with a parrot and a cow. The creation process was meticulous. In a darkened recording studio, Walt himself provided Mickey's voice, his thin falsetto filling the room like a cheerful ghost. Musicians played a simple, catchy score that matched the action beat for beat. The synchronization was so precise that audiences gasped when they first heard a cartoon character chirp and squeak in perfect time. There was no violence, only a playful rhythm that made people smile without quite knowing why. It was as if a page of drawings had suddenly learned to hum. The first public screening of Steamboat Willie took place at the Colony Theater in New York on a cool November evening in 1928. The theater was a modest but graceful building, its marquee glowing softly against the dark sky. Inside, the seats filled with critics and everyday moviegoers, none quite sure what to expect. The house lights dimmed, the projector whirred to life, and there on the screen was a plucky little mouse steering a riverboat, his ears like twin moons. The audience did not erupt with cheers. They did something quieter and perhaps more profound. They leaned forward, eyes wide, and simply watched, utterly absorbed. From the opening whistle to the final note, a hushed delight filled the room. When the short ended, the silence broke into warm, appreciative applause, not thunderous, but genuine. Walking out into the crisp night, the viewers carried with them a new friend, one who would soon become a household name across the globe. Back in California, the success of Mickey Mouse brought a new kind of energy to the studio. More short films were planned, each one a small experiment in character and timing. Mickey's personality grew softer and gentler. He was no longer a mischievous prankster, but a kind-hearted everyman, always trying his best. The animators worked in a building that now buzzed with quiet creativity. Hallways were lined with corkboards covered in pencil sketches. The courtyard fountain trickled peacefully, a focal point for breaks and daydreams. Walt would often wander among the desks, coffee cup in hand, observing the drawings without saying a word. His presence was calm but felt. He understood that these characters were like children, and the studio like a nursery for imagination. The light in the rooms was always soft, the windows dressed with thin curtains that diffused the bright California sun into a gentle glow, creating a timeless atmosphere where a mouse could indeed conquer the world. Around this time, something else lovely began to happen outside the studio's walls. Children, and adults too, started writing letters to Mickey. They penned fan mail in careful cursive, decorating envelopes with crayon drawings of their favorite mouse. The postman would deliver them in bundles, and Walt would often read a few aloud to the staff. The words were simple: "Dear Mickey, I like your smile," or "Thank you for making me laugh when I was sad." These letters were a quiet testament to the power of honest, good-natured storytelling. No grand battles had been fought, no castles stormed. It was simply a little mouse doing ordinary things, steering a boat, playing a piano, sweeping a shop, and people found comfort in that. The world in the late 1920s was on the cusp of great change and uncertainty, but inside the Disney studio, A cocoon of warmth and whimsy was being spun, one frame at a time. Mickey Mouse did not shout his way into history. He tiptoed in, soft-footed and cheerful, and gently took the world by the hand.